Mayday, last chance for all of us to survive global warming. The architect Roberto Guillermo Gomes warned since 2009 about the danger of accelerating feedbacks from global warming. Now the alarms are going off. The accelerated melting phase of the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica began. It is the size of Florida. It can raise the oceans by 30 centimeters and destabilize other adjacent glaciers whose melting would raise the water another 3 meters. On October 2, 2019, Gomes published the book Efecto Cassandra. Arctic methane bomb analysis. Unanswered question to scientists about abrupt cloth rate reversal in 2025 30-inch. In it, he affirmed that, by the average of 2030, it will reach 450 ppm of CO2, if we continue at the same rate of contamination, and as a result of the fateful 2 degrees C that will activate the positive feedbacks that will cause the abrupt thawing of the Arctic continental permafrost and after submarine cloth rates, which are already showing an active thawing process. At the same time, the floating ice of the North Pole during the summers will have disappeared, together with the albedo effect, and the Arctic Ocean will be warming to 5 degrees to 7 degrees C, triggering the release of methane gas hydrates from the bottom. Then the global temperature will shoot up to 4 degrees or 6 degrees C and up to 12 degrees C at both poles, starting the accelerated melting of Greenland and Antarctica, being able to raise the oceans up to 70 meters in years and not in millennia, flooding all coastal cities and causing 900 million simultaneous environmental refugees. In other words, he clearly warned about the high probabilities of feedbacks or positive feedbacks in global ecosystems in a domino effect, and this will intensify from the period 2025-2030, leading to inflection points that will lead to abrupt accelerations in warming. Global. On November 23, 2020, he also published through the same Spanish academic editorial the book, Master Earth to Save the World. Cloth rate rifle active in 2025-2030. To avoid the catastrophe, there is no time left. We must already invest 2% per year of world GDP. They would apply extreme measures. He stated that humanity is going through a deep crisis of accelerated growth due to technological change, global warming, overpopulation, ecological variations, and the potential for hostile alien intrusion before the end of the present 21st century. You need to bring together the best human resources to ask the right questions and get the right answers you want. Under this premise, the Gaia Team convenes renowned thinkers, scientists, and qualified humanists to develop a master plan to save the planet and a new social contract with a view to the XXII century, which contemplates the development of a Type 1 pre-civilization technology, with a universal language, planetary eco-government, global direct digital democracy, international council of sciences, planetary army, minimum life income for the entire population to face labor replacement by robotics, and AI, abolition of extreme poverty throughout the world, stop global warming, decontaminate and ensure peace on all continents. We discussed this with William J. Ripple, Ph.D., Director of the Alliance of World Scientists. The Gaia Team is an initiative that consists of bringing together the wise men of the earth to work as a team to provide feasible and operational solutions that renew hope. This was what Gomes wrote to him. A master plan to save the planet must say what has to be done and also how to do it. In this sense, the first priority is financing. Without intensive capital for a long time, there will be no long-term solutions. It needs to be applied between 2 to 3% of world GDP annually to solve the triple scourge of hunger, overpopulation, and global warming. Once the nations of the world decide to allocate the vital funds, the issue is in which programs to apply them, how to do it, for how long, and how to control the administration of funds so that there is no corruption in the system. The second most important point is to proceed with the immediate planting of 30 billion kiri trees per year, to then cut down their trunks and bury them, in order to capture CO2 and return it to the subsoil. The third point is how to coordinate all the necessary actions. For this, a planetary eco-government system is proposed, centralizing the decision-making capacity. This supranational structure would be controlled by a form of global direct digital democracy, advised by a science council, made up of scientists from all nations. The fourth point is to limit overpopulation, one child per family, which is what accelerates pollution and consumption. The planet only supports 5,000 million inhabitants. And if we consider non-renewable resources in the long term, the number is reduced to 1,000 million. The planet has finite resources, it does not support overpopulation with exponential growth. It's been 40 years since people started talking about global warming. Why hasn't anything effective been done until now? Because the system of economic and political organization that we have does not allow it. If we want to save the planet, we must change the system of social, economic, and political organization, integrating a new supranational scale. Go directly to a Type 1 technological pre-civilization. Pre-civilization. Now, the problem we all have is the little time we have left to act preventively. In 2030 it will reach 450 ppm of CO2 in the atmosphere. The Arctic Ocean will completely thaw in the summers and overheat. This will allow the immense deposits of subsea methane gas hydrates to be released. An explosive chain reaction will occur. And it is possible that the phenomenon will be activated earlier, between 2025 and 2030, when the floating ice of the North Pole has been reduced to 50–75%. Determining the time of this event horizon is the job of scientists. It is something that is urgent to do. We are all at risk and there is not enough awareness about the problem. What do I propose? Scientists who want to participate will be emailed questions on these topics for feedback and ideas. Then a report and a book will be made, which can serve the political system and governments that make decisions. William replied that the points were fine, but that a similar initiative already existed, the Drawdown Project. And he asked what he thought about this. Gomes replied, "The Drawdown Project has a time projection for 2040 and 2060. The point is that we have time to apply a comprehensive response to the global warming problem until 2025. Hopefully, practically the measures should be taken now, immediately." Immediately. The main point is the perception of environmental risk based on the possible Clathrate rifle. As I explained to you, by 2030 we will reach 450 ppm CO2 in the atmosphere, the floating ice at the North Pole will thaw in the summers, the Arctic Ocean will warm up, and submarine methane gas hydrates will be released on a large scale. Without we can do nothing to stop this catastrophe. And it is possible that the effect will spread and also release the immense stores of carbon on the seabeds of the oceans around the world. Then we would find ourselves facing a scenario of probable runaway warming, with intense water vapor covering the planet. The IPCC studies do not consider this risk and it is urgent that they do so. If this can happen between 2025–30 we are almost out of time to act. Extreme measures must be applied, as happened with the COVID-19 pandemic. The Drawdown Project defines what needs to be done in different areas. It says nothing about the form of global financing, how to coordinate global actions. It does not offer details about the reforestation plan and the necessary investment in fusion reactors, which are vital. It does not include social, economic, and political reorganization in its list of possible solutions. They could be invited to join a broader and more ambitious master plan to save the planet. William replied, "Your points are well taken. Activation of the Thwaites rifle in 2025-30. The Thwaites gun hypothesis is a scientific theory that rising sea temperatures can lead to a sudden release of methane from methane clathrate deposits on the ocean floor. This would cause environmental disruption of the oceans and the terrestrial atmosphere similar to what could have happened in the mass extinction of the Permian Triassic and in the thermal maximum of the Paleocene-Eocene. Wikipedia. Can this happen? Let's look at the data. CO2 concentration. The atmospheric concentration of CO2 measured at NOAA's Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii increased during 2015 by 3.05 parts per million, ppm. The current increase is 200 times faster than prehistoric records. What is worse, the atmospheric CO2 level is already, April 2022, at 417.21 ppm, with an average annual increase of 2.75 ppm. If this percentage is not raised further, by 2030 it will reach 445.25 ppm. But considering the escape of carbon and methane from permafrost and submarine clathrates, plus the overconsumption of fossil fuels, we will exceed 450 ppm before 2030 and cross the threshold of the dreaded 2 degrees Celsius global average temperature. Reduction of the floating ice of the North Pole. The floating ice of the North Pole accused in the period of greatest retreat, September, 8 million square kilometers. Today it has come to contain 3 to 4 million square kilometers and half the thickness of ice. So the summer ice has been reduced to a quarter of the volume it had in the 70s of the last century. There is practically no more multi-year ice, formed several years before with large ridges. Now almost all the ice forms during the current season and reaches an average thickness of 1.5 meters with small ridges. It is estimated that the ice that forms during a single winter will be able to melt completely in a single summer, 2030. And immediately afterwards the albedo effect will disappear and the oceanic waters of the sector will start to warm up 5 degrees C and may cause the release of the immense deposits of submarine methane gas hydrates. This will speed up heating by 25 to 500% depending on the magnitude of the release of gases. Permafrost thawing. Arctic permafrost is thawing rapidly. Doing so creates cliff-like sinkholes the size of multi-story buildings collapsed into the ground, where methane escapes. In the background you can see the bones of mammoths and other Pleistocene animals that remained frozen for thousands of years. According to some estimates, between 30% and 70% of the permafrost may thaw before 2100. Only 10% of the carbon that is released represents 150,000 million tons. Bacteria and viruses of already disappeared diseases are also released. In addition, the United States Geological Survey estimates that there is a total of 1,656,000 tons of mercury trapped in polar ice and permafrost, which is beginning to be transferred to the food chain due to thawing. The problem with permafrost is the increase in temperature in the Arctic. 3 years ago the soil temperature was -3 degrees Celsius, after -2, after -1, now it is +2 degrees. With the aggravating circumstance that the permafrost now shows an active process of thawing throughout the year. Before, many thought that a maximum of 10% of permafrost would be lost in a period of 80 years. But everything is speeding up when the active layer stops freezing in winter. The added heat allows microbes that consume organic matter in the soil to continue to work, emitting carbon dioxide and methane year-round. Winter heat is melting permafrost more rapidly, and the whole process is accelerating at an unpredictable rate. Across the planet, permafrost harbors 1,600 gigatons of carbon, almost twice as much as is present in the atmosphere. Currently, permafrost covers 1/5 of the Earth's surface, mainly Greenland, Alaska, Canada, and Russia. In total, the IPCC estimates that between 37% and 81% of current permafrost will be lost to global warming. Submarine methane gas. hydrates. The East Siberian Arctic Shelf, ESAS, is the largest and shallowest shelf in the world's ocean with a mean depth of around 50 m. With an area of 2 million square kilometers, hosting the largest deposit of permafrost and methane gas hydrates on the seabed. Drs. Shakova and Semilitov study the sector and warn about its high instability. They indicate that when the permafrost layer is lost, the release of methane will begin. Natural warming added to anthropogenic cause permafrost degradation processes at levels that have never been seen before. They explain that in some places in the ESAS the submarine permafrost is reaching the thawing point, which can lead to increasing methane emissions, going from a linear trend to an exponential one, determining a turning point depending on the level of warming reached. Once the cork-acting permafrosts have thawed, the submarine clathrate deposits will begin to be released. The scientists indicate that within the ESAS 200,000 square kilometers are currently critical, since methane emissions are already observed. It has been found that the underwater permafrost of the Siberian Arctic is already losing 14 centimeters per year, a greater loss than terrestrial permafrost. The retroactions have already started. Arctic permafrost stores nearly 2 trillion tons of organic carbon, nearly half of all organic carbon stored in Earth's soils. Its release represents a major accelerating impact on global warming. If the temperature increases by 2 degrees Celsius, 40% of the permafrost will thaw, which will release methane gas, which in turn will further increase the temperature and release more methane, causing a positive feedback. What explosive cocktail do we have then? On the one hand, the threshold of 450 ppm of CO2 will be reached in 2030 and the global average temperature may reach 2 degrees C, then the floating ice of the North Pole will thaw completely during the summers. Ipso facto, the waters of the Arctic Ocean, as the albedo effect is no longer present, is reflected, they will slow down and may increase up to 5 degrees Celsius, which is what is needed for the immense deposits of submarine clathrates to be released abruptly. This describes a chain reaction for 2030. But, taking into account that there is already an active process of accelerating Arctic permafrost thawing, with the release of methane gas, which contributes to atmospheric warming and has begun a decade ago, the release of methane gas hydrates, the turning point for a phase change in the entire global ecosystem, we could place it between 2025/2027. This is based on the fact that the floating ice at the North Pole is reduced by 50 to 70%, allowing part of the Arctic waters to warm up 5 degrees C. Once the clathrate rifle is started, there is no human power that can stop it. And the problems do not stop there. If the chain reaction is intense enough, the immense carbon deposits in all the ocean beds of the world can be destabilized and the global temperature of the planet rise 6/8 C or more, starting a warming process runaway, with vaporization of seawater and a multiplied greenhouse effect, the final consequence of which will be to push the surface temperature of the entire planet towards 100 degrees C. The result? The extinction of all known forms of life. Moving to a barren planet Earth like Venus is. Before, many thought that a maximum of 10% of permafrost would be lost in a period of 80 years. Many of our hypotheses are falling apart, says Royson Kamain, an atmospheric chemist at Columbia University who tracks carbon emissions by plane. In total, the IPCC estimates that between 37% and 81% of current permafrost will be lost to global warming. This clathrate rifle hypothesis for the period 2025/2030 misplaces us all as humanity. It leaves us with no time to act. The mitigation measures planned in the medium and long term are no longer useful. Promises of solutions in 20, 40, and 60 years such as those announced by the Drawdown Project are obsolete. Measures are required to cut pollution effectively and drastically immediately. What measures to implement? Prohibit individual combustion cars in all cities of the world, cut off the electricity supply after 8 p.m., reduce the operation of thermoelectric plants, reduce air flights by 80%, prohibit tourism, reduce consumption to a minimum, reduce meat intake and replace it with vegetables, stop felling trees and move to planting 30 billion new trees per year, invest capital intensive in the development of fusion reactors, avoid travel, limit overpopulation by authorizing only one child per family. And in the face of the emergency, apply a comprehensive re-engineering of the world's social, economic, and political organization system, adding a coordinating supranational structure, the planetary eco-government, controlled by a system of direct digital democracy, advised by a council of sciences, integrated by scientists from all continents. And above all, allocate sufficient intensive capital funds to address the global climate emergency in a critical phase. Already the speeches of environmental politicians, of climate scientists with their graphs, have gone to hell. They have been devoured by the new reality of the catastrophe in process. When should it be done? Immediately. There is no more time to act preventively. Pollution must be stopped abruptly and at the same time implement medium and long-term measures that allow the future extraction of atmospheric CO2 to stop its inertia of warming. In addition to sustaining the rhythm of the economic system working so that it does not decline. What are the chances of this actually happening? This hypothesis has a 5 to 50% chance of being fulfilled within the aforementioned period. Likewise, in the face of deniers, scientists must provide irrefutable empirical data that refute this possibility. Otherwise, support this warning, collaborate and help the world society to prepare for what is to come. During the last 5 years, the planet has entered into an active process of positive feedback involving 4 natural systems and 3 anthropogenic systems. These are thawing of the floating ice at the North Pole and reduction of the albedo effect, thereby warming the waters of the Arctic Ocean and melting more ice and permafrost. What accelerates the melting of the massive glaciers of Greenland and the oceanic rise? Acceleration of permafrost thawing, with release of carbon and methane gas into the atmosphere and start of the release of clathrates or submarine methane gas hydrates on the Arctic shelf. Increasingly massive and intense natural forest fires in Siberia, the United States, Europe, Australia, Alaska, Canada, Africa, and the Amazon, caused by droughts and heat waves. This reduces the areas of continental CO2 sinks, which are released into the atmosphere, accelerating warming. Anthropogenic forest fires, either due to burning prior to planting, felling, abandoning branches, or carelessness leaving poorly extinguished bonfires. Anthropogenic pollution is around 40 gigatons of CO2 emissions in the world per year. To this is added that the oceans are losing the capacity to absorb 31% of the CO2 generated by man. Between 1994 and 2007 they caught 34 gigatons, billion metric tons. Surfactants, an oily film that spreads on the surface of the water, reduces the exchange of carbon dioxide by up to 50%. As surface temperatures increase, this organic layer increases and causes a further decrease in the exchange of gases between the atmosphere and the oceans. As the effect increases, there will be an inertial increase in CO2 in the atmosphere. Overpopulation, with 8,600 million inhabitants by 2030, puts pressure on the overconsumption of food and energy until the planet's resources are exhausted and global warming is accelerated. There is a direct cause and effect relationship. The combination of all these feedbacks will lead to rapid and uncontrolled heating, the negative impact of which can be compared to a thermonuclear war. To stop it, it is necessary to drastically reduce carbon dioxide emissions and, where possible, extract the surplus already released into the atmosphere. In 100 years we have released into the air what took 500 million years to accumulate in the subsoil in the form of oil. Ripple and Wolf study. Time is running out to avoid the worst effects of climate change, The researchers from Oregon State University, OSU, the University of Exeter and other institutions said in the report recently published in the journal One Earth. According to OSU's William Ripple and Christopher Wolfe, co-authors of the study, research on feedback loops needs to be, immediately and massively, boosted to help world leaders make climate policy. Many feedback loops significantly increase warming due to greenhouse gas emissions, they noted. However, not all of these feedbacks are fully accounted for in climate models, they noted. In particular, they urged the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, the UN Climate Expert Group, to produce a special report on the effects of feedback loops and their potential serious consequences. Once sufficient warming has occurred, feedbacks could ultimately cause the Greenland ice sheet to collapse, Wolfe explained. Waiting until 2050 to achieve net zero carbon emissions might be too late, according to the authors. And, in the long-term worst case, interactions between feedback loops could result in an irreversible change from the current state of Earth's climate to a state that threatens the habitability of humans and other life forms, they added. Possible answers. How to act. GSL Systems proposes to redirect capital resources. Through the Global Solidarity, Live, greeninterbanks.com and microwindows.app portals, we are working to act preventively in time. However, we need the support of scientific groups and businessmen. This report supports what was sustained through previous notes and the urgency of activating the scientific team of the Gaia Team, so that it can investigate, evaluate, and determine the next threshold of climate anomaly in a maximum time of 90 days. And then it is endorsed or refuted by the UN IPCC experts, also within a maximum period of 90 days, because our time is up. We have 2 to 5 years left to apply drastic damping measures on a planetary scale. According to WMO predictions, we will break the threshold of 1.5 to 1.8 degrees C in the next 5 years. Then great intercontinental structural droughts can occur. As a consequence, half of the world's population can die of hunger as the few food reserves run out. Our priority concern is the possible activation of the Thwaites gun at the North Pole. To measure this risk, we have set up the scientific research team of the Gaia Team. To activate it requires $1 million of financing. This scientific report is urgently needed. We are against the clock. A world where more than $100 million are paid for the purchase of a soccer player and nobody wants to donate $1 million is counterintuitive of dollars to save the entire planet. We must avoid breaking the threshold of 1.5 degrees C and 2 degrees C. We cannot allow it. For this we can activate the ESCO-PX project and apply new climate adaptation adjustment measures, taking zero carbon emissions as a goal for 2030. Let us work together and in a cooperative and coordinated manner to save 8 billion human beings from the foreseeable tragedy of accelerating global warming. Together everything is possible. New parameters, new climate goals for 2030. To confirm the study by the Gaia Team, with the support of the international scientific team of the UN IPCC, that there is a probability of more than 5% that the Thwaites gun will be activated at the North Pole, and positive feedback will push the ecosystem towards runaway warming, which will end with a surface temperature of 100 degrees Celsius, making the planet uninhabitable. We must immediately activate drastic, coordinated, planned and synchronized climate mitigation countermeasures, globally. The new deadline to reach zero carbon emissions is 2030. And there are only 2 to 5 years to complete the change over the entire energy park towards renewables and alternative energies, and replace the entire vehicle fleet with electric and hydrogen vehicles. It is possible to do it. Since 2019, when Gomes published his first warning regarding the danger of positive feedbacks in exponential domino effect, accelerating global warming outside known limits and activating inflection points or phase changes of planetary thermoequilibrium without return, you have had time to think and plan. He has designed an emergency and alternative master plan to save the planet, based on the new emerging variables. To put it into operation, everyone must cooperate: scientists, companies, governments, and consumers. Working united and synchronized, all together, we will achieve it. To do this work, GSL Systems, or Global Solidarity, LIVE, needs the support of the scientific sectors, businessmen, politicians, and governments in general. It requires initial capital contributions to be able to activate and deploy its large-scale projects. The plan in its initial phase consists of donating 50% of the net profit obtained by all its systems to help end hunger, extreme poverty, and global warming, inviting all multinationals to do the same for 5 years. This must be done as long as governments still do not assume their corresponding responsibility for the Green Solidarity Fund's allocation of 2% of world GDP annually to stop global warming and end hunger and extreme poverty. Banks and investment funds have a capital of $56 trillion. There are enough financial resources to solve the problems. It is only necessary to reorient them. Once the possibility of hyperacceleration of global warming is confirmed and that runaway warming can also occur, this will be done. Let's have faith in this. One of our programs at greeninterbanks.com is to activate and develop the Forest Card credit card to finance the planting of 30 billion new trees per year. We are just beginning. The beginnings are slow and sacrificed, but people will end up understanding that everyone must participate and cooperate, because there is no other alternative, otherwise we will not survive. There is so much pressure that we have put on the environment in such a short geological time that everything can end in runaway warming and make the planet uninhabitable. We are not proposing marches or protests, we are focusing on global strategies and concrete actions to counter the anomaly. We ask all the NGOs to join our request to all the governments of the world to approve the Solidarity Green Fund of 2% of the annual world GDP to end hunger, extreme poverty, and global warming. Without capital-intensive financing there will be no global solutions. Through the global e-commerce and e-business digital projects brought together by Global Solidarity, LIVE, we plan to raise capital. We will donate 80% of the proceeds from the Megastore system to humanitarian NGOs. The other digital business units will contribute 50% of the net profit to help stop global warming and replace the energy matrix. The priorities are: 1. Unite the humanitarian and environmental NGOs of the planet to demand and urge the prompt allocation of 2 or 3% of the annual world GDP to end hunger, extreme poverty, and global warming by the governments of our planet, as advised by the UN and Master Earth. 2. Allocate $500 billion per year from the Global Green Solidarity Fund to end hunger, extreme poverty, pandemics, the illiteratism, and other social injustices. 3. Act in cooperation with the scientific, business, NGO, and government sectors to reverse global warming, taking as a new goal to reach zero carbon emissions in 2030. 4. Create a coordination infrastructure to solve global crises, the global eco-government. 5. Universalize the global direct digital democracy system advised by a scientific council made up of the best scientists from all continents. 6. Replace the monetary unit for qualified time and assign life annuities to the entire population in order to replace the equation between capital and work by transferring production systems to AIs and robotics. 7. End inequality in the distribution of world resources by abolishing extreme poverty. To be able to do all this work we require an initial investment of $1 million. We are managing the registration of GSL Systems as a corporation in the USA, and shareholdings for $100 million will be for sale. If we do not stop polluting before 2030, we will not survive and we will be doomed. Simple as that. To confirm this data, the acceleration effect due to positive feedback, the scientific report of the Gaia team is required, whose financing requires a contribution of $1 million. Report that must then be confirmed or refuted by the IPCC. Either we do this or extinction. There is free will. The United Nations is currently talking about organizing the efforts of all countries to reduce carbon emissions by 45% before 2030 and reach zero emissions in 2050. This objective may be insufficient if we are within a short time distance from the critical threshold for the abrupt chain reaction of the release of methane gas in the Arctic Circle and carbon in the other oceans of the world. If this is the case, it will be necessary to reach zero emissions immediately. Irreversible tipping points. Professor Johan Rockström, Director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, and Dr. David Armstrong McKay from the University of Exeter warn that giant ice sheets, ocean currents, and permafrost regions may already be past the point. Irreversible inflection. The collapse of the Greenland glaciers is in an active phase and accelerating with the current 1.1 degrees Celsius increase in global temperature. Ocean levels can rise rapidly. The North Atlantic haline current may collapse, disrupting the rainfall cycles on which billions of people depend for food. Permafrost rich in carbon and methane gas can thaw abruptly. When the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold is reached, there will be changes in the vast northern forests and losses in almost all mountain glaciers. The researchers indicate that the world is heading towards a warming of 2/3 degree C, which will activate 16 tipping points and others in a cascade. With possible destabilization of the Amazon rainforest and its irreversible loss, affecting the climate of the entire planet. The extinction of tropical coral reefs will also take place along with changes in the West African monsoon and the Indian summer monsoon, with likely loss of oxygen from the ocean. In addition, the melting of the Antarctic glaciers will accelerate. The first 6 climate points of no return. 1. The collapse of the Greenland ice sheet. 2. The collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet. 3. The collapse of ocean circulation in the polar region of the North Atlantic. 4. Extinction of coral reefs in low latitudes. 5. Sudden melting of the permafrost, permanently frozen soil layer, in the northern regions. 6. Abrupt loss of sea ice in the Barents Sea. If you or your company wish to support and cooperate with the mission and objectives of GSL Systems, please contact us. God does not want the extinction of life on Earth. But we as humanity must do the work to save the planet, our families, and ourselves by returning to harmony and balance with Mother Nature. Everyone have faith. God gives us a second chance at redemption. We will make it. The worst mistake we are making is believing that we have time to avoid the worst.